Hardit, thank you for coming on today. I imagine that you've been doing a lot of work with Power Apps and Teams lately, and that's how you came up with this topic, huh?
Right. Yeah, it's been something that I've been doing for the last approximately 1 year. Definitely one of my coolest projects. Crazy at the same time, but that perfect balance between craziness and fun is what makes it interesting.
Yeah. Was this topic something that you just got kind of personally annoyed with and decided to solve it? Or was it something that you rolled your app out and then your users came back and went, oh my gosh, I'm bouncing back and forth between other things in Teams and this Power App. Can you fix this and make it easier on me?
So combination of both, right? So initially, way back when this was introduced, you couldn't even pop out the Power Apps maker outside of Teams. That was my biggest pain because you working inside the studio and get a chat message, you go to the chat and then you come back and then you will have to start all over again. So that was my biggest pain point. And then as people started using a couple of our apps, they started complaining about the same because not all the apps would need this feature. And I'll talk about examples of which ones would need this the most. So it was a combination of both, a couple of makers complaining about it, and then people in general just complaining about the fact that using apps and Teams is cool, awesome, but the fact that when you come back you lose your entire session was a huge pain point.
I've already seen two different folks in the chat say this is a huge pain point for me too. So yeah, nice. Feel free to take over the screen there and show us what you've got. Your Twitter profile pic must have been taken a little bit ago.
Yeah, that was way back when I did not have the COVID weight gain and I was just getting married. So I wasn't even married in that pic. So a combination of COVID and marriage results in this. So most of you, I'm sure, if not all of you, know about Dataverse for Teams, but just some background. It brings the capabilities of Power Platform into Teams. You can use Power Apps, Power Automate Flows, Power Virtual Agent Bots right from within Teams. And it's not just about using them, you can even create them from within Teams. So pretty powerful and makes a lot of sense, especially these days when most of us spend a lot of time in Teams, right? So all of us are working from home. We chat a lot, we have meetings in Teams. So given the fact that we spend almost the entire time of our working day in Teams, this just makes it more productive to stay within Teams and still create all the fun stuff that you love creating. I consider Dataverse for Teams, or I like to call it the lighter version of Dataverse. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but some of the capabilities of full Dataverse, like row level security, some of the complex fields like polymorphic lookups, they don't exist in Dataverse for Teams. So it is a lighter version, but I still think it's awesome because it's a relational database. And one thing that I really like about Dataverse for Teams, which is not yet available in Dataverse App Maker, is the fact that you can edit tables using the table editor, almost like Excel. So you open a table, you start entering data, and it gets saved. So I think that's pretty cool. So that's why it's when I say it's a lighter version, I'm not diminishing what Dataverse for Teams is. It has a few features that are better than full Dataverse, but then some of the complex features or the rich features that you get with full Dataverse are not available in Dataverse for Teams. It brings with it a set of new controls called Fluent UI controls. They are awesome. The very first time when I looked at those controls, I had a bad reaction, which was, why do these controls have less properties? Power Apps is all about, Canvas apps at least, is all about customization. So why should I give up on a few properties? And then eventually, slowly, as I started using them, I felt that I think that those controls are pretty cool because yes, they come with less properties. For example, I don't think you can add a border to a label, but that's the whole point, right? If you start making a Canvas app, if you don't pay enough attention to UI, your app, even if functional, can look pretty bad. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to create apps that look good without you paying any attention to the UI. Just to give you one quick example, if you add a button, you get a new property which asks if the button is a primary button or not. If you say it's a primary button, it looks like the purple button you see in Teams without you setting any color property for that button. So I think just for that reason, these controls are pretty slick. I am not the best designer by any imagination, but the apps that I create within Teams are actually looking way better than the apps I've created outside of. So I think those controls are pretty cool. If you haven't checked them out, strongly suggest you do. One thing to keep in mind, there are certain properties that have been renamed. I think can't remember them off the top of my head, but properties have been renamed. So that has been throwing off makers a little bit, especially those who have used Dataverse earlier. So do check it out. There is a link on Microsoft Docs, which I can share, that explicitly lists out the properties that have been changed. And then it just provides better integration within Teams. And yes, we have the Teams connector that we can use outside of Dataverse for Teams. But there is a Teams integration object when you create an app within Dataverse for Teams, which gives you a lot of contextual information with regards to where you are in a team. Are you in a meeting? Are you in a channel? And so on and so forth. What is your Teams mode or theme? Is it dark mode or is it high contrast? Is it default? So a lot of cool stuff using the Teams integration object. And if any one of you has used embedded Canvas apps, that is Canvas apps inside of model-driven apps, you would know that there is a model-driven form integration control, which gives you the context of where your Canvas app is or which record it's in. So just like that, there is this contextual integration object for Dataverse for Teams as well. With that said, in the last year or so, I think we've created like 5 out-of-the-box sample apps for Dataverse for Teams. We are in the process of creating 4 or 5 more. I'm going to talk about a couple of them where this particular feature that we will be reviewing today makes a lot of sense. I'm going to use inspection as an example. So what that allows you to do is it allows you to set up areas or assets and then define inspection forms or checklists. And then each checklist can have multiple checklist steps. It comes with 3 apps. So if you install inspection from the Teams App Store, you'll get 3 different apps. One is the Manage Inspections app, where you can set up areas, you can set up checklists. Next is Review Inspection, where you can review the finished inspections. It also gives you some basic analytics information using Power Apps, Canvas app charts. So even if you don't have Power BI, you will get some insights into how the inspections are going. And then the third is the end user app, the inspection app, which you can use to perform an actual inspection. And there are multiple different ways you can record your findings. For each step, you can record if it was okay or no, or if it's not applicable. And then you can also add notes to each step, and then you can capture multiple images for each step, which for an inspection makes a lot of sense. What happens is when you open an app, let's say within a channel, and before that, let me get to one other point. So there are 2 ways now, or 2 places now where you can add an app. Well, 3. One is within a meeting. I'm not going to touch that for now. First way that you can add an app to Teams is within a channel. And then the other way, which was rolled out not too long ago, is broad distribution, where you can actually pin your app to the left nav in Teams. It's just like how you have chat, Teams, calendar, or meetings. You can actually have an app pinned there, so you can easily access it without having to go inside of a channel. And I like broad distribution a lot because just like how you can pop out the Maker Studio now within Teams, you can even pop out a broad distribution app from your left nav. So keeping that one aside, if your app is inside a channel, when you start the session, you start, let's say with inspections, right? So you start recording your findings, then you figure out that you need to go to another channel. Maybe, I don't know, you might want to go to Wiki to get some information, or you get a chat message that you have to reply to. When you come back to the app, you lose all your information. So the session that you were in gets lost. Let's see if this works fine. I have a small recording of the inspection app on my phone. It's an older version, so if you install it now, it'll look slightly different. But I'm going to select an area here. I selected a checklist step, and then I'm going to start recording my findings. So the first is OK. I'm going to add a note. And I'm not going to add a picture because really isn't needed to illustrate the point. But now when I go back into the app, it'll again ask me if I want to perform an inspection. And if I say yes, it will make me go through the entire process again, and the information I added gets lost. Now, in this particular example, it's a couple of steps. Sure, you can do that again, right? But in reality, most inspection forms have 5 or 6 or 10 different steps. And you might have captured images as well. So a lot of information that you can easily lose, which you will have to capture again. So it's a huge pain point. And out of the 5 different apps, so inspection, employee ideas, bulletins, milestones, and issue reporting, this is the most relevant. This is most relevant for inspections and issue reporting, because these are used by front-end workers who are performing inspections or reporting an issue. And that's when you are capturing a lot of information. So you definitely need this feature. If you're creating a project in milestones, even if you lose a little bit of information, it's not that critical. Surely you can go into the app and add it again. But these 2 apps specifically, inspections and issue reporting, will make this very painful. So when we say that we need to retain a session, the first thing that comes to my mind is offline capability. Sure, it's not exactly the same. You are still within network, within range. So you're not losing connectivity, but you are still kind of losing the connection with your app. So because it sounds very familiar to offline capabilities, that's why the approach that you can take to resolve this is the approach you take when making an app offline capable. And the basic steps, right, are you save all your data in collections. Then you save that collection using save data on your as a local file on your device. Then you load those collections using load data during app on start. And then if based on what data you get back, you can redirect the users to the appropriate screen. So with those changes, this is how the same app behaves. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start an inspection. I will select area, start the inspection now, and then record the findings for the first step. So I'm going to mark this OK, add a note, and then save it. And then I'm going to navigate out of this app, go to another tab or another chat, doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to go back into the app and see what happens. So as the app loads, it checks if there is data. If there is, I expose another button that says continue last inspection, and it retains all the data that I'd captured. So it says that I had recorded the first step as OK, and I also added a note. If I would have captured images, they would show up here as well. So this makes it pretty useful, right? Users won't have to think twice before navigating to another chat or tab within a team, fearing that they'll lose all the data. So with that said, with offline capabilities, excluding the Windows app for Power Apps, which has a lot of issues and I don't think has been supported in a long time, offline capabilities are supported on mobile devices. They don't work on web. But with Dataverse for Teams, they work on mobile devices and your team's desktop app. It still doesn't work within a browser, which I really hope happens one day, but it brings those capabilities to desktop as well. So with that, I'm going to cover a few tips and best practices. So if you have records, especially ones that have image fields in them, don't store the entire record, right? You can just store the GUID. And when you load the app again, you can find the GUID, do a lookup, and then get the full record. This is important, especially when you are on desktop, because the storage limit is limited to 1 MB. And most of the pictures that we take these days are more than 1 MB or very close to 1 MB. So if you take one picture, you're done. So That makes it very important that you conditionally store images based on the device that you're accessing the app from. If you're on a mobile device, feel free to store everything. But if you are on desktop, you want to make sure you conditionally save data, limiting the number of records you store or limiting the data that you store because of the storage limitations, which is 1 MB on the Teams desktop app. So how would you do that? There is a parameter called host client type. It has 4 different values: web, desktop, iOS, and Android. So web is when you're accessing Teams through a browser, desktop is when you're accessing it through Teams desktop, and iOS and Android are if you're accessing it through an iPhone or an Android device. So what you can do in the app on start is check what the value is for host client type. So I'm setting a very simple variable, checking for the client type. If it is web or desktop, then I'm setting that variable to false. If it is iOS or Android, I'm setting that to true. Now, after that, wherever I'm storing data, storing my collections into local files using save data, I check for that variable. So if I'm on a mobile device, then save my collection of images. If I'm not, ignore the images. So with that one simple parameter, you can conditionally control what data you want to save if the user is on a mobile device versus if the user is accessing Teams through desktop. And I'll get to one of the best practices and tell you why this is important and how I ran into this accidentally. So a couple of best practices here. First one, which applies not just to this particular use case, but whenever you use load data, there is a third optional parameter called ignore non-existent file. I set it to true every single time, because if you don't do that, when a user accesses this app for the very first time, data has not been saved yet on their local devices. So in the app on start, when you do load data, it's not going to find the file, and it throws a very ugly error, which you don't want to show to your end users, especially if they're accessing the app for the first time. So set that to true. If load data doesn't find that file, it'll ignore it. If it does, it'll load the data. Second is the clear data function. I don't think it's listed in the Power Apps formula reference, but it is another function in this group of functions for saving data and loading data. Clear data, at least in my testing a few months ago and until actually even a few weeks ago, doesn't work. It actually doesn't clear data in your local files. And you can do a quick test to check if it works now, right? You can add a button, store a text in a variable, and then add that variable or try to save that variable into a local file using save data. Then clear the data and check when you reload the app, do you still see it? And most likelihood you will. So what I do is I clear the collection and then use save data. So it's a combination of clear and save data that gives me the same result as clear data would have given. The last one here is an error message that you might see when you use save data. The error message is actually pretty misleading. It says there was a problem saving your data, name could be too long. When I first ran into this issue, I thought my collection names or my local file names are too long. So I actually went through the entire app, renaming my collections, renaming my local files, and I was still running into this issue. That's when I figured out that this error comes up when the amount of data that you're trying to save is more than the limit. So like I was actually storing images even when I was accessing the app through the Teams desktop app, and that's when I was getting this error. So that conditionally storing data when you are on desktop makes a lot of sense because it reduces the probability of you reaching the data limit, and that prevents you from seeing this ugly error message right at the top in your app. That's pretty much it from me today. Hopefully that was helpful, and thanks Chuck and Todd for giving me the opportunity to sharing this with the community.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming and sharing it with everybody. I see a few different folks talking about how helpful they find this in the chat already. There is one question that popped in chat that you didn't answer along the way. I don't know if you even saw it, but it was related to trying this in SharePoint. Have you ever tried this in a SharePoint Power App? I've never tried save data and load data in a to do that in the SharePoint Form Power App before, so I'm not sure if that is capabilities available there. I think it would be.
So if you're accessing, and again, I haven't used SharePoint a lot, but if you're accessing SharePoint through a browser, I think it won't be supported just because save data, load data are not supported in a browser. That would be my guess. But yeah, it would definitely be fun to test it out and figure if that works.
So you probably, I don't know of any way to open up the Power Apps Player app and then open up the app associated with the SharePoint list. I just can't fathom how that would work. So I guess in that case, it's probably, you're not going to be able to pull it off for that one.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome. Come on back next time you have something else cool to share. We'd love to have you again.
Thank you.